Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Underdog episode. Today we got Season 4, Episode 10, Recover. A loud, continuous beeping sound plays, lasting 5 seconds. The camera is shown on Jake, who's sitting in a hospital room with a hospital gown on. His eyes are closed and he's scrunching his face, trying to listen. Once the beeping is finished, it cuts to a doctor sitting on the opposite end of the table with a file in her hand. She looks intently at Jake through the lens of her round glasses. Jake looks at the doctor. "Did you hear the beeping?" Jake watches the doctor's lips move and then flicks his eyes back to hers. Can you say that again?" The doctor pulls out a pencil and jots something down on a paper before sliding the paper across the table to Jake. The paper reads, "Did you hear the beep sound?" Jake reads the paper and looks up at the doctor and shakes his head with a frown. The doctor pulls the paper back and writes on it again. Jake reads it as she slides it back over. That was the loudest decibel. Jake looks away from the paper and closes his eyes. The doctor frowns in response and pulls the paper back to her and slips it into an open file. Jake opens his eyes again and looks back at the doctor, who's reviewing other papers in her file. Jake leans forward. "Is my hearing gone?" The doctor shrugs and says the next word more deliberately. "We don't know." Jake sighs and slumps in his chair. "Better than a no, right?" the doctor says, dragging her words again. "Do my friends know I'm here? You want us to contact them?" Jake squints, trying to decipher what she said before eventually understanding. Yes, please." "All right, you can wait here." The doctor gets up and walks through a room outside the room Jake's in. Jake stares at the wall and closes his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. It cuts to Dylan standing in the same field. Wander's body is lying there, enclosed by the tall grass surrounding it. Dylan is sitting on his knees, staring off into the distance. The blades are forgotten as they sit on the ground. It cuts to a close-up shot of Dylan's face, still unmasked. His eyes are still, and his mouth is agape. The blood from the scratch has ran its course as the scar has now formed. He runs a hand over his face, feeling the ridges of the scar, and leans over, placing his face into the grass. He brings his hands up and clutches onto the grass and pulls it out of the ground. He leans back up and stares at his hands, which are covered with the grass. With shaky legs, he gets up off the ground and goes over to the blades, holstering them back onto the back. He then walks over to Wanderer's body, standing over it. It cuts to an overhead shot of Wanderer. Dylan walks in a frame and bends over to pick up his body. He begins to walk through the field with the body still tucked in his arms. He takes slow and steady breaths as he continues across the grass. Suddenly he stops and looks around before levitating himself with his powers and beginning to fly away. It cuts to the front door of the warehouse. Dylan flies in a frame with Wanderer's body, landing softly onto the dirt ground in front of the door. He enters the warehouse, looking around. He sees Alan's body and stops in his tracks. He takes a shaky deep breath and turns to his right, lying Wanderer down onto the couch, one of Wanderer's arms falling off the couch. Dylan looks around the warehouse again, squinting his eyes. Dylan clears his throat and begins to speak. "Jake, you in here?" His voice echoes on the walls. After a few seconds and with no response, Dylan goes to a chair and collapses in it, slumping immediately. Dylan scoots up and props his elbows onto his knees, planting his face in his hands. He sniffles before it cuts back to Jake in the hospital. He's sitting in a new room that has a warm yellow light illuminating it. There's brown carpet on the ground and had tan wallpaper on the walls. He's sitting in a bland chair with a hearing aid in his right ear. There's a different doctor sitting across from him in another chair with his hands laid out across a small circular table separating them. It cuts to the paper in front of the doctor, where there are rows of words crossed out. The doctor looks up from the paper and meets eyes with Jake. "All right, Jake, can you hear me?" With a blank expression, Jake shakes his head. The doctor sighs and crosses out another row on the paper. He looks back up and talks to Jake. "I'm sorry, but that's the last pair we have." Jake cocks his head to the side. "Can you write down what you just said?" The doctor quickly nods and slides the paper closer to him and begins to write. After he finishes, he slides the paper to Jake. Jake's face deepens with sorrow, a tear falling from his eyes and onto the paper, dampening it. So what? Is my hearing really gone? Jake's voice breaks mid-sentence. The doctor rubs his temple while nodding his head. So, what do I do? The doctor lowers his hands and picks the pencil back up, writing on the paper again. After finishing, he slides the paper to Jake. Jake reads the paper, and his frown deepens more. Can I go home now? The doctor writes again. Jake sighs and slumps back in his chair. You said none of my friends answered. How do you know any of them will come? The doctor looks up at Jake, who's looking back. Faith. Jake looks down at the table after the doctor's words. It cuts back to Dylan in the warehouse, who's still sitting in the same chair. Dylan glances to the right, where the bean glasses lie on a table, dismantled. He then looks to the main console, where a button on it is beeping red repeatedly. Dylan lets out a breath and flings himself out of the chair and storms at the console and clicks the button. Hello, this is Dr. Reed from the NYC hospital. We have Jake Wilson with us. Dylan clicks the button abruptly and turns around quickly, heading for the front door. He slings the door open and steps outside. Before going any further, Dylan looks down at himself and pats his right and left hip rapidly. He sighs and turns back to the front door. The door closes, and some time passes before Dylan walks out again, wearing normal clothes this time. Dylan lifts himself off the ground and flies away. It cuts to the hospital, where Jake is sitting idly in a waiting room, staring at a painting of a mountain on the wall. The girl to the right of Jake, who's also sitting down, looks at him and then at the painting. It's a nice painting, isn't it? The girl looks at Jake, who continues staring at the painting, not responding to her. Name's Riley. Riley stares at Jake for a couple more seconds before scoffing and turning away from him. To the right of Riley, Dylan walks into the hospital and right at Jake, covering his view of the painting. Jake flinches backwards and looks up at Dylan. Come on. Dylan grabs Jake's arm and forcefully pulls him out of the chair. Jake stumbles to his feet and Dylan lets go of him. Riley watches with confusion as Dylan steps outside, where the darkness envelops the parking lot, due to the lack of moonlight. Jake jogs up to Dylan and grabs his shoulder, spinning Dylan around to look at him. Dylan sees Jake's down expression, matching his own. What? My hearing is gone. Dylan furrows his eyebrows, stepping closer to Jake and leaning in, making Jake notice his scar. Jake squints his eyes as Dylan starts to talk. What do you mean? I mean what I mean. Dylan looks over his shoulder at the restaurant behind him before looking back at Jake. Do you have your wallet? Jake scratches his face before it cuts to the two sitting across from each other inside a low-lit restaurant. They both have glasses of water sitting in front of them. Dylan is sitting straight with his hands placed on the table, while Jake is sitting more relaxed. So, how did you lose it? Dylan says slowly, for Jake to see. The past week I've been hearing these visions, hallucinations. Dylan shifts in his seat and takes a sip of his water. Whatever they are, they sounded so real and so loud. The talking around them fills the silence as Jake tries to find the right words. I heard the windstorm before it happened, and I heard Wander waking up. Dylan squints his eyes. I could hear him breathing, moving, blinking, even. So what? You were hearing the future? Jake reads Dylan's lips and scoots up in his chair before replying. Maybe, or maybe somebody planted those hearings into my head. Damn. I don't know, but Zara and, Miranda. Dylan sighs and takes another sip from his water. He got them. Dylan sniffles as he rubs his hand over his mouth, clearing his throat. Who did? Dylan looks at Jake, his eyes blank. My dad. Dylan closes his eyes and droops his head a little lower, and he killed Wanderer. The camera cuts to Jake, who is too stunned to even speak, as he is also sitting straight up in his booth like Dylan is. And I don't know what to do. Jake blinks a few times before diverting his eyes to the table. He taps his full glass as Dylan takes another drink from his. Do what you've always done. had faith, and persisted. Dylan swallows the water and sets his glass back onto the table. How can I have faith? Dylan stops his slower talking and sees Jake's unsure face. At least Wanderer's dead. Right. Dylan scoots forward and gets ready to speak. Wanderer, confirmed that he is me from the future, and he's the reason I got the scar, if you were wondering. Jake's mouth drops slightly before he closes it and bites his lip before responding. Didn't he say his goal was to kill you? Why would he kill himself from the past? Wouldn't that erase him from time? I don't know. He's just a lunatic. Jake exhales from his nose sharply and finally takes a drink from his water. A waiter walks over to their table and pulls out a small notepad. What can I get you to? Jake glances at Dylan, who mouths the words order to him. Jake nods as he turns his head to the waiter and begins to speak. I'll have your classic cheeseburger with onion rings. The waiter nods as he writes down in his notepad. He then looks over to Dylan. I'll just have the same thing. Perfect. That'll be right out. Before I go, sir, would you like a refill? The waiter looks to Dylan's glass, which is now completely empty. Yeah, please. Thanks. The waiter nods and walks away from the table. Dylan looks back at Jake. Seriously. I'm lost. I just stood there and let him take them. Hey, clearly he is powerful, and there was nothing you could have done. How am I supposed to know? I didn't even try. Jake takes a deep breath and slumps back into his booth. I don't know how, but we will figure this out, and we will get them back. Dylan wipes a stray tear from his eye and nods his head. He cuts to a sleek and shiny table that is long. It's inside of a dark pink tinted room that is decorated with other furniture, matching the aesthetic of the table. On one side of the room, there are 4 small rooms that have metal pillars with many panels and wires on them. The pillars are separated by the gap that acts as the opening to the small rooms that contain a flat metal bed attached to the wall and nothing else. Near the entrance of the dark room, a staircase leading to a grand door glows bright with an array of colors. It cuts to a shot of the stairs where a fragmented portal, identical to Dreamer's, opens. The fragmented portal glows as Dreamer, still wearing the rainbow glowing metallic disc on his chest, walks out from it. The portal closes and Dreamer snaps his fingers, making Miranda and Zara appear from thin air and fall into separate cells. Then, Dreamer swipes his hand, making red, see-through force fields generate over the cells, blocking them off. Dreamer goes up to a table as Zara and Miranda begin to stand up off the ground. He twists the disc, making the metal straps retract from the end of the disc. It falls off his chest, and he catches it, placing it onto the long metal table. He walks over to the cells, where Zara and Miranda are now on their feet, looking back at Dreamer. Welcome. Better get comfy. Dreamer clasps his hands together, and the camera cuts to Zara and Miranda, standing stiff.